It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when my family invaded my Chicago penthouse. They didn't bother with the courtesy of knocking. They used the emergency keys I had been naive enough to entrust them with, the same keys I'd handed over years ago when I still believed boundaries were a sign of mistrust instead of survival. The door opened without warning, and just like that, my sanctuary became a negotiation room. My brother Joshua positioned himself against the granite island as if he owned the place, the sharp scent of stale bourbon clinging to him, barely masking something sourer underneath: anxiety, desperation. My parents, Karen and David, stood beside him, not like concerned visitors dropping by late, but like auditors arriving for an overdue collection. My father didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need $65,000, Lauren," he said, his tone stripped of warmth, stripped of pretense. "Joshua's margin call is due." It wasn't a request, it was a demand dressed up as family duty. When I said no, my mother didn't explode. She didn't plead or attempt tears. Instead, she calmly reached into her designer handbag, withdrew a thick stack of papers clipped neatly together, and let it fall onto my glass coffee table. The sound it made was deliberate, heavy, final. A petition for emergency guardianship. The stated reason: mental instability. "We're doing this for your own good," she murmured, her voice soft in a way that made it colder. "We're taking control of your assets tomorrow morning." Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The door shut behind them with a quiet click, and the silence that returned to the penthouse was dense enough to press against my lungs. I didn't run after them. I didn't shatter the porcelain vase of white lilies on the wall, even though the urge flared bright and violent in my chest. Instead, I walked to the door and turned the deadbolt slowly, hearing it lock into place. Then I secured the secondary lock I'd installed 3 months earlier, back when Joshua had started asking suspiciously detailed questions about my annual bonus and stock options. I moved back toward the kitchen island where the petition lay like a landmine. I didn't open it. I already understood its purpose. It wasn't paperwork, it was artillery. I poured myself a tall glass of ice water, watching the cubes crack as the liquid filled the glass. My hands were steady. The only moisture in the room was the condensation sliding down the outside of the glass. I drank deeply, letting the cold anchor me, letting it numb the daughter inside me who still wanted to believe this was some twisted misunderstanding. What remained was the architect, the woman who understood structures and stress points. When a load-bearing wall fractures, you don't cry at it. You assess, you reinforce, you redesign. I carried my laptop to the dining table overlooking the sweep of Lake Michigan. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the reinforced glass, indifferent to domestic warfare. It was 11:15 p.m. Court opened at 9 a.m. I had exactly 9 hours and 45 minutes to make myself untouchable. I began with the credit bureaus: Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. One by one, I placed comprehensive security freezes on my files. No loans, no credit lines, no utilities. Nothing could be opened with a PIN that existed nowhere but in my memory. Frozen, frozen, frozen. Then the banks. My parents knew my social security number. They knew childhood details designed to answer security prompts. I logged into my primary account and replaced my password with a 30-character string of random symbols and letters. I rewrote every security answer. Mother's maiden name became the serial code from my laptop battery. First pet turned into the tensile strength formula for reinforced concrete. Every traceable vulnerability erased. Then I addressed liquidity. If they managed to secure a temporary order, I refused to have my cash sitting in plain sight. Years ago, anticipating a potential buy-in at my firm, I had opened a separate high-yield holding account they'd never heard of. Tonight, it became my lifeboat. I initiated a transfer of 90% of my accessible funds. The confirmation window glowed on the screen. "Are you certain you want to transfer $112,000? I didn't hesitate. I confirmed. The progress bar crept across the screen before flashing green, complete. I moved to my company's payroll system next, removing my direct deposit details. If they somehow froze my checking account, my next paycheck, $8,200, would remain suspended safely in payroll until I redirected it. By 12:03 a.m., my financial footprint had dissolved. I was a ghost inside my own accounts. The petitions still waited on the coffee table. Mental incompetence. I finally skimmed it, not for shock, but for strategy. They intended to argue I was unstable, impulsive, incapable of managing my affairs. I reviewed my digital activity logs instead, precise, systematic, deliberate. There was nothing erratic about this. It wasn't panic, it was containment. I wasn't unraveling, I was fortifying. Outside, wind scraped against the glass in long, low moans. I opened a spreadsheet and titled it Family Liabilities. Then I began cataloging. Joshua's DUI in 2019, $12,000. Mom's last-minute Mediterranean cruise labeled a mental health reset, $8,000. Dad's emergency country club dues to avoid public embarrassment, $15,000. Line after line. Bailouts disguised as loans, investments that evaporated, checks written in silence. The total blinked at the bottom, $214,000 across 7 years. Why did I keep paying? It wasn't generosity. It wasn't even love. It was conditioning. They tether a baby elephant to a stake when it's small. It pulls and strains, but it isn't strong enough to break free. Eventually, it stops trying. Years later, when it could uproot the stake effortlessly, it doesn't attempt it. It still believes it's bound. I was that elephant, conditioned to believe my value was transactional. A perfect report card bought dinner without criticism. Silence bought temporary peace. Money bought the illusion of approval. I wasn't funding their crises out of affection. I was paying rent for my own acceptance. The petition labeled me incompetent. Something inside me snapped clean in half. I wasn't small anymore. I wasn't tethered. I was the architect who designed seismic-resistant towers meant to endure catastrophe. When you discover the foundation is rotten, you don't patch it, you condemn it. By sunrise, Lake Michigan reflected streaks of iron gray and crimson. My phone erupted at 7 a.m., vibrating incessantly across my desk. I let it buzz. Notifications stacked in rapid succession. Joshua, Karen, David, extended relatives. Aunt Sarah asking gently if I was having a breakdown. Cousin Mike asking if I was safe because Joshua claimed I'd threatened myself. I read every message with a flat expression. They were constructing a narrative before I could enter a courtroom, painting my composure as instability, my refusal as delusion. I opened a voicemail from my father sent at 2 a.m. His voice was thick with liquor. "You think that money is yours, Lauren? Who paid for your piano lessons, your math camps? That's my return. You don't steal from the people who invested in you." I saved it. I duplicated it. I uploaded it to multiple encrypted drives. And I finally understood the equation. To most people, a child is a person. To a narcissist, a child is equity. My salary was not income, it was dividend. My boundaries were not autonomy, they were breach of contract. The realization didn't break me, it cauterized the last open wound. They weren't frightened for my well-being, they were terrified of losing control over an asset they believed they owned. I scrolled to the one number that had been quietly removed from family gatherings years ago, the only relative exiled for questioning the math. I dialed Aunt Lisa. She answered on the second ring. "I was expecting your call," she said, voice crisp and dry. "They filed for guardianship," I told her. "I'm aware," she replied. "Your mother posted a prayer chain request about your mental health episode 20 minutes ago. Be here in an hour. Bring black coffee." Her office was less a workplace and more a fortified bunker disguised as a forensic accounting firm on the 42nd floor in the Loop. The air carried the scent of burnt espresso and calculation. I passed the reception desk without introduction. The glass doors buzzed open. Lisa stood by the window in a charcoal suit that radiated authority. She didn't embrace me. She gestured to the leather chair across from her. "Let me see it." I handed over the petition. She read in silence, glasses perched low on her nose. Then she let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Manic, reckless, danger to self," she repeated. "They're arguing the woman who manages 9-figure construction budgets can't manage a checking account?" She dropped the file back onto the desk. "They're desperate, Lauren. Narcissists avoid court. They avoid records. They only escalate when they're cornered." I mentioned the $65,000. She shook her head. "If it were just that, they'd manipulate you privately. This is nuclear. It invites state scrutiny." She pressed the intercom. "Send in the team." Moments later, 3 associates entered carrying laptops, sharp-eyed and silent. They looked less like accountants and more like strategists in tailored suits. Lisa stood up. She walked to the whiteboard. "We aren't just defending you against a competence claim," she announced. "We are performing a hostile audit. If David and Karen want to tell a judge that they are the responsible parties and you are the liability, we are going to open their books." She turned to me. "I need everything you have access to. Old tax returns from before you were 18, trust documents, the address of every property they've ever claimed to own." I gave her the access codes. I gave her the social security numbers I had memorized. I watched as her team began to pull the threads of my parents' financial tapestry. On the screens, numbers began to scroll. Credit scores, mortgage liens, credit card balances. "Find me the anomaly," Lisa ordered. "Find me the reason they are so terrified of losing control that they'd try to lock their own daughter away." The room hummed with the sound of cooling fans and typing. I sat there drinking the black coffee someone had placed in front of me. It tasted bitter and clean. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the client, and I had just hired the shark. It took 6 hours to find the lie. The sun was crossing the sky and dipped behind the skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the conference table. The hum of the servers had become a white noise backdrop to my anxiety. I had paced the length of the room 40 times. I had drunk 3 cups of black coffee. Then the typing stopped. One of the associates, a young man with tired eyes, printed a single document. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and handed it to Aunt Lisa. She read it. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked up at me. And for the first time, the predator's gaze softened into something that looked terrifyingly like pity. "Lauren," she said, "sit down." I sat. The leather chair felt cold against my back. "Who owns the house in Naperville?" she asked. "My parents," I said. "They bought it in 1998. "They bought it in 98, Lisa corrected, "but they don't own it. Not anymore." She slid the paper across the desk. It was a property tax history report. "Look at the transfer date. 10 years ago, May 12th. I looked at the date. It was the day my grandmother Eleanor died. "The deed was transferred," Lisa said, her voice steady and quiet, "from David and Karen to the Eleanor Trust." "I don't understand," I said. "Dad told me Grandma died without a will. He said everything went to probate to pay off her medical debts." "He lied," Lisa said. "There was a will and there was a trust. I just pulled the filing from the county clerk's archives. Your father didn't probate the estate. He suppressed the will and appointed himself the executive and trustee." She leaned forward. "Lauren, the trust documents name a single beneficiary." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what she was going to say before she said it. "It's you." The room seemed to tilt. "Me? The house, the remaining portfolio, it was all left to you. Your father was supposed to transfer the title to your name when you turned 25. He didn't. He buried the paperwork. He has been living in your house rent-free for 4 years past the legal deadline." The pieces slammed into place with the force of a wrecking ball. The panic in their eyes, the desperation, the guardianship petition. It wasn't about the $65,000 for Joshua's gambling debt. That was just the trigger. The real terror was that I was turning 30 next month. In many trusts, a 10-year audit is automatic. They knew the clock was ticking. They aren't trying to declare you incompetent because they think you're crazy, Lisa said, her voice hard as dynamite. They're trying to declare you incompetent because if you're legally incapacitated, your father remains the trustee indefinitely. He keeps the house, he keeps the secret, he keeps the control. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city I had built, the life I had constructed from scratch while believing I was nothing but a burden to them. All those years, I thought I was paying rent on my existence. In reality, they were the squatters. I turned back to Lisa. The sadness was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was the cold blue flame of absolute tactical precision. "They're living in my house," I said. "Yes," Lisa replied, "and they're trying to put me in a cage to keep it." "Yes, then let's go to court and let's burn it down." The hearing took place in courtroom 402 of the Daly Center. It was a windowless box of beige acoustical tile and fluorescent judgment that smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. My parents sat on the left. They had dressed for the role of the heartbroken saviors. My mother wore a soft blue cardigan, a costume designed to evoke sympathy, and dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. Joshua sat beside her, looking bored, checking his watch as if he had a tea time to catch once they had legally seized my existence. Their lawyer, a man named Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my first year of college tuition, began his opening statement. He painted a picture of a tragic decline. He used words like unhinged manic spending and paranoid delusions. He told the judge that my sudden freezing of assets was proof of a break from reality, a cry for help from a woman who had lost her grip. I sat with my hands folded on the table, my spine pressed against the hard wood of the chair. I didn't flinch. I watched them perform. It was a play, and they were terrible actors, but the script was dangerous. Aunt Lisa leaned in close to me. Her voice was a low steel whisper that cut through the drone of the opposing counsel. "Look at them, Lauren," she said. "Really, look at them. If we hadn't found that box in the basement, if we had walked in here today empty-handed, you would be in a medicated facility by Friday. They would have you on sedatives by the weekend to keep you compliant. Joshua would be driving your Porsche to the casino by Monday morning. They weren't just going to take your money, they were going to hollow you out and wear your life like a skin suit." The image hit me with the force of a physical blow. The alternate reality where they won wasn't just unfair, it was a horror movie. It was the total erasure of myself. That fear didn't make me tremble, it solidified me. It turned my blood into liquid nitrogen. Sterling finished his speech. He looked smug. He thought he had won. "Miss Vance," the judge said, looking at Aunt Lisa, "do you have a response regarding your client's mental state?" Lisa stood up. She didn't pick up the medical records, she picked up the deed. "Your Honor," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room, "we are not here to discuss my client's mental state. We are here to discuss the petitioner's criminal intent. We move to dismiss this petition on the grounds of unclean hands and fraud upon the court." The judge frowned. "The petitioners claimed they are concerned parents," Lisa continued, walking toward the bench. "In reality, they are squatters who have been illegally occupying my client's property for 10 years. She placed the documents on the judge's bench. The silence in the courtroom was sudden and absolute. It was the sound of all the oxygen being sucked out of the room. "Exhibit A," Lisa said, "the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance, suppressed by the petitioner, David Vance. Exhibit B, the deed to the property at 1412 Oakwood Drive. The property is held in trust. The sole beneficiary is the respondent, Lauren Vance. The petitioners have been concealing this asset to live rent-free in a multi-million-dollar home that belongs to the woman they are trying to declare incompetent." I watched the judge read. I saw his eyebrows knit together. Then I saw his face harden. He looked up from the papers. He looked at my father. My parents' faces turned the color of old ash. The smugness vanished from Joshua's face, replaced by the slack-jawed realization of a man watching his meal ticket burn. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, "are your clients aware that they are currently residing in the respondent's property without a lease while hiding her inheritance?" Sterling stammered. He looked at my parents. He saw the guilt written in their panic. He closed his briefcase. "Your Honor," Sterling said, "I was not informed of this. Petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice." The judge banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the state's attorney's office for an immediate investigation into trust, fraud, and perjury. Get out of my courtroom." My mother started to wail, a real sound of terror this time. David slumped in his chair. Joshua looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. I didn't look back. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out. The air in the hallway was cool and clean. The war was over. The occupation was ending. I didn't go out for champagne to celebrate. I drove to Naperville. The house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, a sprawling monument to their deception. It looked different to me now. It wasn't my childhood home. It was a crime scene. I walked up the driveway. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't need to. I owned the door. My father opened it before I could reach the handle. He looked 20 years older than he had that morning. He smelled of defeat and scotch. "Lauren," he started, his voice cracking, "we can explain. We were just trying to protect the asset for you." I didn't let him finish the lie. I handed him the manila envelope. "This is your official notice to vacate," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and final. "You have 30 days. The locks will be changed on November 1st at noon. If anything is missing, a light fixture, a painting, a single spoon, I will press charges for theft. The sheriff has a copy of the inventory list." My mother stood in the hallway weeping into her hands. Joshua was behind her, holding a duffel bag, looking like a trapped animal. "And you," I said, looking at my brother, "you aren't a tenant. You don't have a lease. You are a guest who has overstayed his welcome by a decade. You don't get 30 days. You have 30 minutes. "Where am I supposed to go?" he whined, the entitlement still clinging to him like a bad cologne. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe you can bet on it." I turned around and walked back to my car. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. I didn't feel sad. I felt the specific weightless sensation of a structure that had finally been stripped of its dead weight. Back in my penthouse, the city was quiet. The wind off Lake Michigan had died down. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop one last time. I pulled up the spreadsheet. Family liabilities, $214,000. I looked at the number. For years, that number had been a chain. It had been the proof of my love and the metric of my exploitation. I highlighted the rows. I didn't try to collect it. I didn't send an invoice. I hit the delete key. The screen went blank. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a write-off. It was a bad debt cleared from the books so the company could finally become profitable. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. I wasn't just a survivor. I was the architect. And for the first time in my life, the blueprint was entirely mine. If you've ever had to buy your own freedom from the people who were supposed to protect you, share this story. You are the architect of your own life now.